you. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah, great. Hi, my name is Rebecca White, or Bex, and I'm the new training manager at Sedex. I've been with Sedex now for about 6 months. I came from working at a university where I helped to run a multi-university program on food systems, and my research background is in environmental impacts of food systems. So coming to Sedex has been really exciting. It's new. I'm learning a lot, and it's been really fun with a great set of supportive colleagues. But less about me and more about what I'm going to be talking about in this session. We've heard a lot this morning about new tools, and what I'm going to be talking through is what we're thinking at the moment in terms of how we're going to support our members through that transition from old tools into the new versions of the tools. We've got some ideas, and I will tell those to you, but we're also then going to break out and work at our tables because we're really interested to get feedback from you, hear about what you think you need and to build or change, suggest alternatives, etc. So the training and support for the transition is really going to take place over, we're thinking about 3 phases. So this talk is going to be talking you through each of those 3 phases. The first phase will be running basically over the next month, mainly, month to 6 weeks, and that's going to really take the form of some webinars. We'll also be putting out some guidance documents and frequently asked questions that will hopefully begin to answer some of the questions you're going to be facing in your company from suppliers in your own head. The next phase is going to be around the launch of the actual tools themselves. And that's going to be much more around tool-based training. Again, more in-depth and broader methodology documentation. As Rebecca talked about earlier, I've put member services in this phase, but actually member services and account management are there all the time, as you know, and they are going to be a really important part of helping you feel comfortable and supported. And then the final phase is really in the follow-up to launch when people start using the tools themselves, and how to make the best of those tools. So I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about each of these 3 phases in the next 15 minutes or so. So the first phase, that's now in the next 4 weeks, starting from next week, we're going to have a series of introductory webinars. Those webinars are going to take place 4 times each, and we're going to be running those at different times of day to try and capture members in different parts of the world. We've tried to get all the different time zones in there. They, as I said, are going to be about sort of background, quite similar to what you've heard this morning. Maybe a little bit more time on the SAQ, each of the topics, to get into a bit more detail. But definitely, if you have colleagues who you think really need to hear what you've heard today, or you want them to have the chance to ask questions and get prepared for these changes, then please do ask that they sign up to those. We'll have one on introduction to changes to the SAQ, a second on best practice risk assessment. I'll be presenting with Stuart on one of those and then doing it myself on the others. Introduction and changes to the risk assessment tool, as we've heard this morning. And then the 4th one is really about also hearing from member organisations. So how do they see possibly integrating these tools? What kind of challenges might they face? What opportunities do they see? And what sort of, again, asking that question, what support do you need to do that effectively? As well as the introductory webinars, we're developing a frequently asked question set. It's already so long it needs a contents page. So we're really being very thorough in developing that. And we'll begin to make that available shortly. We've got risk assessment guidance from Ergon that Stuart talked through this morning. And we've also commissioned Ergon to create 4 service provider briefings. This is really helping, given that the new SAQ is going to be also service provider facing. And these briefings are covering, there's one for each of waste collection, construction, security, cleaning and catering, as well as transport and storage. And each of those is just 3 or 4 pages, but really nice, easy to access overview of the nature of risk to workers in those kinds of service sectors. And it also outlines really nicely the kinds of due diligence approach you might want to take to thinking about understanding and managing risk in those service sectors. So all of the recordings of the webinars will be recorded, and those documents are going to then sit on a part of our website that we're building at the moment for the SAQ and risk assessment tools. And that's going to be your go-to place. So this is just a screenshot. That's where we'll be putting our supporting documents, our recordings, and our updates. But we'll also be regularly emailing out to you once to twice a month with any updates, new materials, new recordings, etc. So that's moving now on to the launch phase itself around the Q1 next year, end of Q1 next year. So the launch for the SAQ I'll talk about first, and then I'll talk about the risk assessment tool. So we'll be doing some really intensive launch webinars around the SAQ, and they're going to be covering changes to the SAQ, but also as you experience them on the platform, so taking you through, say, the extended profile section, showing off some of the guidance that we heard about earlier. We'll talk about the transition plans. We'll also talk through how do you interpret this new supplier-facing report and how can you use it and get the most out of it. And as that was mentioned, Alexia mentioned earlier, there will be links from the new supplier-facing report into the Supplier Workbook, corresponding to high-risk issues in the supplier-facing report. You'll get corresponding chapters from the workbook linked into that report. So we'll be talking through a bit, how do you, just introducing you to the new Supplier Workbook, how you can use that. We'll also be putting out frequently asked questions documents, buyer-facing and supplier-facing on that, and have a guidance document on the SAQ. Why are we asking these kinds of questions? Why are we choosing to score it in this way, etc. So that training will then get integrated into our ongoing training on the SAQ, and we'll be creating step-by-step guidance as well. So moving on to the risk assessment. Oh, no, not moving on yet, because we're definitely going to be trying to put out that launch package of support in Spanish, Mandarin and English. So in terms of when we launch the risk assessment tool, anyone who uses the risk assessment tool now knows that you had to do some training and get sort of given access to the risk assessment tool in order to use it. And what we're going to do is we are going to give those people who currently access the tool automatic access to the new tool. However, as I hope you could appreciate from what Tom was presenting this morning, this tool is different. It's the breadth and depth of information you get from it is significantly larger than what we have at the moment. So we would really, really encourage you to retake your risk assessment tool training so that you know how to use it and how to get the most from it. So for those people who want to be able to start from day one of launch, we're going to be training 2 weeks intensively prior to launch, offering webinars on how to use the risk assessment tool. And I've called this part 1 because the tool is big, it's detailed, you can use it sort of in a shallow way and a really deep way. We're probably going to be, or we will be splitting the training into 2, but this basic risk assessment training part 1 is going to cover things like the context of risk assessment, and talking to the point that Lee made earlier, we do need to make sure we know how to use it responsibly, how you do interpret information from it, and how you shouldn't be interpreting information, and just making sure we're really using it carefully and appropriately. Core reports, how we access them, where we find them, but also how we interpret them. Scores, we're now moving to a 2-score system, and we'll have information on audits next to that, so there's going to be some help there in that. How do you begin to think about all that kind of information together? And some information about the methods behind the tool. And then from launch, we'll obviously continue to do that part 1 training, but we'll also then be offering a sort of deeper dive almost into the tool, which will have more background on score development and data sources, additional reports that we haven't covered in that core set, and then some more kind of case study based learning. What do you do in this sort of situation when you're getting these kinds of scores and this kind of risk data? And then looking at a different kind of report and data set and asking, what might you do in this kind of situation? And we'll also be offering a separate sort of risk assessment tool training for auditors and how to use the reports available to auditors. We will have lots of great guidance documents and thesis, and Sedex are putting together a guidance document for the risk assessment tool. It's going to go into framework details, definitions, data sources, methods, and then also a frequently asked questions set, which will kind of sit in the risk assessment tool as well, and as well as outside it. So then, in terms of once we've launched the tools and hopefully people begin to use it, explore it, suppliers, businesses are starting to fill out the SAQ. And this stage is really about how can we encourage that to happen, and then how can we support kind of effective follow-up. And a big part of that is going to be our new Supplier Workbook. This is not the new version, this is the old version. I don't know how many of you have used this book before, or this resource. It's very comprehensive, systematically goes through each of the issue titles within SMETA and takes you through a sort of set of subsections. Each chapter is similarly laid out, so you can really know exactly what you're going to get. And if you need to look into overtime, you can go to overtime or managing hours, and then you'll find the same layout, same as the management systems chapters, etc. So we're going to keep a lot of that sort of systematic, same structure. But we've asked Verite, and Verite are going to update it for us in time for the launch of the SAQ, to kind of add some more elements into it. So they're going to be, hopefully the user interface is going to be much better. It's going to be easier to access, more reliance on visuals, graphics, flowcharts. There's going to be more troubleshooting sections and talking about the difficult to handle situations and how might you go about handling those. We'll have a brief self-assessment checklist for each chapter. So if a business wants to know how can I, or what do I need to do to be compliant on worker accommodation, then there'll be a checklist in that for the supplier to work through. We'll be providing guidance on root cause analysis. How can you begin to get to the bottom of the issues that you might be facing, and what's causing those issues to arise? Lots of case studies. We're always interested in case studies. So if anyone here has a case study, is interested in talking about possibly having one, please do approach a member of Sedex staff and talk that through. We'd love to hear from you. And finally, the new SAQ has an enhanced section on KPIs, and we'll have a corresponding element on what kind of KPIs you might want to collect, why you should be collecting them, what they can help you understand, and what improvement on that front looks like. So it will be available as in paper tome, but we'll also be making it available through our website, chapter by chapter, so you can link into specific areas. And as was talked about before, a supplier report, depending on where you have high risk outcomes through your SAQ filling out, you'll be then given the corresponding chapter link in that report. So a supplier organisation can click straight through to that and begin to take advantage of the information in this workbook. And that workbook will be available in 12 languages and English. And the final bit to this following up is just to encourage the filling out of the SAQ, really. And so that's going to include timely emails to suppliers to encourage completion over that 12-month transition period. There'll be a pop-up every time you enter Sedex Advanced, I think that was mentioned earlier, to remind you that there's more to do on it. And within Sedex Analytics, buying organisations can compare completion rates on old versus new SAQ as well, and again, follow up on that.